When we think of ninjas, we imagine them in the shadows, silent, invisible, able to move without leaving traces, as if the body itself were a perfectly calibrated instrument. But there is a question that almost no one asks, a question far more concrete than it seems. What did ninjas really eat? And above all, how much of what we know is history, and how much is legend? Because food, for those who lived in the shadows, was not pleasure. It was strategy. It was survival. And to understand this, we must first understand who they really were. Ninjas were not mystical warriors endowed with supernatural powers. They were men, and sometimes women, trained in survival, espionage, and adaptation. They operated mainly between the 15th and 17th centuries in a fragmented, unstable Japan marked by continuous wars. Their task was not to fight in open fields, but to endure, travel long distances, hide, observe, return alive. And in all this, the body had to be light, silent, reliable. Food became part of training, and when the body is a tool, eating also changes meaning. Direct historical sources are few. Much information comes from later texts, manuals attributed to ninja schools, and modern reconstructions. Yet some points recur with surprising consistency. The diet attributed to ninjas was simple, low odor, easy to digest, functional, not abundant. No strong spices, no foods that left olfactory traces, no excesses. Eating too much meant being slow. Eating poorly meant getting sick, and getting sick on a mission meant not returning. It was not a cultural choice, it was a necessity. According to the most reliable reconstructions, the basis of the diet was similar to that of Japanese peasants of the time. Rice in moderate quantities, seasonal vegetables, legumes, especially soy, miso, fermented, nourishing, easy to preserve, dried fish, seaweed, roots. Nothing spectacular, but everything extremely practical. Food had to nourish without weighing down, last over time, be available everywhere. Not a special diet, a smart diet. And often simplicity is the hardest thing to accept. There is, however, one element that stands out above all, the so-called ninja pills. Not legends, not modern inventions, but preparations described in one of the most important sources on ninjutsu, the Bansenshukai, a manual from 1676. According to this text, ninjas prepared true anti-hunger pills designed to sustain the body during long secret journeys when stopping to eat was impossible. One of the best-known recipes produced small dumplings called hyorugan. They were prepared by combining Japanese potatoes, rice, cinnamon, and lotus seeds. Simple ingredients, but carefully chosen, easy to preserve, compact, energetic. Another preparation mixed pine bark powder, ginseng, and white rice, then steamed. According to the Bansenshukai, a few bites of these pills could sustain several people for 3 days without other food. Today we know that each pill provided about 300 calories. It was certainly not a hearty meal, but it was enough to keep walking and to keep living. Alongside these were also the so-called thirst balls. The Igaru Ninja Museum describes preparations called suikatsugen, designed not to nourish, but to reduce thirst during long journeys on foot. They were made with umeboshi pulp, crystallized sugar, licorice, Japanese mint, dried plums, and sometimes ergot fungi, ingredients rich in salts and electrolytes, useful for supporting the body under prolonged exertion. They were not potions. They were practical solutions born from observing the body and its limits. Not magic, but knowledge applied to survival. Some sources speak of an ideal weight around 60 kg, not as a fixed rule, but as a functional reference. A light body leaves fewer traces, consumes less energy, and withstands fatigue better. Eating was not an act of identity, it was part of training. And this says much about how ninjas saw themselves, not as heroes, but as temporary tools in service of a mission. And perhaps this is where the distance from our time becomes evident. Today we live surrounded by food, overabundance, endless choice, constant stimulation. The ninja diet strikes us because it is the opposite. It is essential, reduced to the bone. It reminds us of a time when eating was not expression, but necessity, when the body was not displayed, but guarded. Perhaps this is what truly fascinates us. Not the mystery, but silent discipline. A discipline that today feels almost foreign. The ninja diet was not secret, it was not exotic, it was not magical, it was simply consistent with a life made of attention, adaptation, and limits. And perhaps the most interesting question is not what they ate, but what have we lost in a world where food is everywhere and rarely serves a real purpose? And you, what do you think? Have you ever imagined food as a strategy and not just as a pleasure?